Right now, Professor Muhammad Sahimi is with us. He is with the website Tehranbureau.com, and also a professor at the University of Southern California, and an Iranian. Professor, welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me in your program.
And thank you for joining us. I've read probably 20 stories this morning on the Iranian election. It seems that one of the most glaring irregularities in this election is that the opposition candidates lost their own hometowns, that the proportion of votes seems to be absolutely identical all around the country. It's huge red flags for voter fraud. Is that consistent with your understanding, sir?
That is correct. In Iran, 45% of the population is made of ethnic minorities, and ethnic minorities in Iran typically vote for one of their own if there is such a candidate in the elections. For example, the Azeri population that speaks Turkish is about 25% of all the eligible voters. But according to the data that was released by Iran's Interior Ministry that supervises the election, even in the Azeri provinces, and Mr. Mir Hossein Mousavi, the main reformist candidate, is an Azeri, President Ahmadinejad has won by a landslide. This is just incredible. Also, according to the data that they have released, and I have written a piece about it on Tehranbureau.com, at every stage of the vote counting, from the beginning to the end, the number of votes that President Ahmadinejad has received is apparently twice that of the votes that Mr. Mousavi has received. Again, this is incredible. Not only mathematically and statistically, this is practically impossible, but given Iran's history and ethnic population and the composition of the population, this is just not credible.
Now, the composition of the population is a big one. Iran, in part because of the long and protracted war with Iraq, and so many people died during that, and other demographic factors, Iran has the average age of their population is, what, 26, 27, something like that? It's a very young population in Iran. And the young people overwhelmingly were in favor of Mousavi and the opposition leader. And yet the vote doesn't seem to indicate that.
That's absolutely correct. 70% of Iran's population is under the age of 30, which, as you pointed out, makes Iran's population a very young population. Last week, prior to elections, there were huge rallies around the country in which tens of thousands of people, and in a couple of cases hundreds of thousands of people, mostly young people, were held in support of Mr. Mousavi, the main reformist candidate. Mm-hmm. So the result of the election do not reflect any of that at all, which is why people do not accept the validity of the results announced by the government.
We're talking with Professor Muhammad Sahimi, Tehran Bureau, TehranBureau.com is a great source for this information. Professor, let me share my take or thoughts on this with you and reality check them if I may. It seems to me that what we're seeing is a huge demographic and psychographic shift in Iran. That after the U.S. helped overthrow Mossadegh and brought in the Shah, and the Shah was brutal and repressive, and the young people in Iran overthrew the Shah, or his cancer helped that process. But the young people in Iran brought about the revolution and ultimately embraced arguably a more conservative form of Islam. Now the young people are embracing a more liberal view of Iran, and it seems to me that the wave of history, the demographic wave of history, these changes that are happening in Iran are things that will not be able to be resisted over the long term, and possibly even over the short term, by the Ayatollahs and by their political hacks like Ahmadinejad, unless the United States does something stupid like George W. Bush would have done, and, for example, bombs one of their nuclear reactors, thus causing a new outburst of nationalism. Does that make sense?
That is completely correct. When the Iranian Revolution toppled the Shah in 1979, there was a vacuum in terms of the presence of political parties that could lead the country to a more democratic state. At the same time, In 1980, Iraq invaded Iran with support of the United States and Western countries, and that occupied the people to defend their country for 8 years. That 8-year period allowed the conservatives, and in particular the reactionary religious leadership, to consolidate their power in Iran and eliminate all the secular forces and moderate and reformist religious parties. But after the war, the young people started to realize that the country could not go on like this. So the reform movement basically was born in 1997 when the moderate reformist president Muhammad Sahimi was elected. Now, with the advent of internet and all other means of communication, Iranian young people are just like any other group of young people around the world. They want more democracy, they want a more open society, they want freedom of expression and freedom of express, they want good international relationship with all other countries, and the conservatives have been blocking most of it. So that's the result. These are basically the driving force behind what we are seeing in Iran today.
So if this analysis is accurate, then right now President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton are walking a very, very delicate line, because on the one hand, if they acknowledge and recognize this election as legitimate, they're going to end up on the wrong side of history. On the other hand, if they speak out strongly in favor of Mr. Mousavi, and correct me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, the main opposition candidate, then he will be tainted by America's endorsement, and that will be used against him by Ahmadinejad. Do I have that right?
That is completely correct. The President and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton must be very cautious about this. Iran's elections are, of course, an internal matter for Iranian people, but at the same time, the international community should recognize the significance of what's happening in Iran. Therefore, they should be really cautious about what they say. As you said, if they make any public statement regarding the invalidity of the election result, that may actually play into the hands of hardliners in Iran, and that can accuse Mr. Mousavi of being an American agent or or United States agent, and that basically is a kiss of death for any candidate under the volatile conditions that we have in Iran right now.
Have I read the news correctly that the European Union has officially recognized this election as legitimate, or was I reading a news report that was sloppily put together? And if so, what's the consequence of that?
I am not aware of any recognition of the validity of the result by the European Union.
Okay.
To the contrary, what I know is that leaders of several countries,
Germany in particular,
Germany in particular, have announced that the result of the elections seem to be fraudulent, and at least a probe into that is necessary. And by the way, I should mention that this afternoon, Tehran time, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei backtracked and ordered a probe into the allegation of vote fraud in Iran. And at the same time, there were huge demonstrations all over Iran in support of Mir Hossein Mousavi today in Tehran. In fact, as we speak, these demonstrations are still going on.
Do you think it's possible that Mousavi will end up being declared the winner?
I don't think he will be declared a winner, but I think if the push by people continues, the more likely outcome of protest will be cancellation of election.
And a new election.
And holding a new election, except that the new elections, if they are held, they will be supervised by a completely different group of people, so that to minimize the possibility of fraud again.
Right, because Ahmadinejad runs the bureau that supervised the last elections, and therefore the problem. Professor Muhammad Sahimi, Tehran Bureau, great website, TEHRANBUREAU.com. Professor, thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you for having me in your program.
Great speaking with you. Professor Muhammad Sahimi, he is a professor at the University of Southern California, TehranBureau.com, great website. And we'll be back with more of the news of the day and your thoughts on SAME, 866-987-THOM, 503-796-2324. ThomHartmann.com if you want to drop into our live chat room or pick up our live free video stream.